Is Joe Biden trying to lose the African American vote or what? Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about former Vice President Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. They really appear to be taking the Black American vote for granted. They've been doing that for decades, and that's really no surprise. But Joe Biden has made a series of gaffes on the campaign trail going back a couple of years that really call into question whether he's in full possession of his cognitive abilities and if he just has good sense about how to address such a vital component of the Democratic electoral base, where generally speaking, they get about 90% of African Americans are going to vote for the Democratic nominee for president when they turn out to vote. And you wouldn't get that impression if you were to listen to what Joe Biden has been saying recently on the campaign trail. In an interview with NPR's Lulu Garcia-Navarro on August 6th, Biden said that the African American community was not diverse with, quote, different attitudes about different things. Let's take a listen to that.
And by the way, what you all know, but most people don't know, unlike the African American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community with incredibly different attitudes about different things.
So there he's saying again that unlike the African American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community with incredibly different attitudes. It's basically giving this idea that African Americans, when they vote, are very universal in their attitudes and are basically unchangeable in that regard. But Latinos, they're a little bit different. And I think that's just, it's not really treating people as individuals. We're not treating people as Martin Luther King once said, by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. Now, President Trump, he immediately took advantage of this on the campaign trail. And he stated that after yesterday's statement, sleepy Joe Biden is no longer worthy of the black vote. So clearly, President Donald Trump, Republican, he wants to make this an issue on the campaign trail. And I think if this were just the isolated one gaffe that Biden had made, maybe that'd be a little bit more difficult. But this is a pattern of very derogatory statements that Biden has been making to black Americans on the campaign trail. On May 22, Biden declared that black Americans couldn't vote for Trump and still be black. It was pretty outrageous. Let's take a listen to that.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community.
And so that was Biden on with Charlemagne the God, and basically saying if you're having trouble picking between me and Trump, then you aren't black. But I think that, that's pretty insulting if you ask me. Now, on August 5th, this goes on and on. Biden told a CBS News reporter, Erol Barnett, who's a member of the National Association of Black Journalists, that being asked if he would take a mental cognitive test would be like asking Erol Barnett if he would, take a drug test. Listen to this.
Mr. Vice President, your opponent in this election, President Trump, has made your mental state a campaign topic. And when asked in June if you'd been tested for cognitive decline, you've responded that you're constantly tested in effect because you're in situations like this on the campaign trail. But please clarify specifically, have you taken a cognitive
No,
test?
I haven't taken a test. Why the hell would I take a test? Come on, man. That's like saying before you got in this program, if you take a test where you're taking cocaine or not, what do you think, huh? Are you a junkie?
What do you say?
So there's Biden then asking Barnett, are you a junkie? And I think that would be pretty stereotypical. And, Barnett, he's a longstanding journalist, originally with CNN, now with CBS News. He didn't really react too much to that comment, but I thought it was pretty insulting. And now in 2019, Biden meeting with several prominent black mayors. This was from the New York Times. During a private meeting with prominent black mayors in Georgia last year, according to three people with direct knowledge of the gathering, he caused a stir when answering a question about education reform. Mr. Biden said one problem black communities face is that, quote, parents can't read or write for themselves, a remark that both shocked and frustrated many in the close-knit group. In a statement, Biden's campaign said he was seeking to reference his own experience. Quote, the vice president regularly talks about his father's experience has shaped the way he feels about and views the relationship between parents and their children learning. But clearly he was saying that the problem the black community was facing was that the children's parents were somehow illiterate. And again, I think that's pretty insulting and kind of derogatory. It just seems like Joe Biden's out of touch, and maybe that's the way he's always been. Just going back, suffice to say, if any Republican running for office had made a single statement like this, let alone all of these statements put together, the uproar would be deafening, and accusations of racism and calls for the party to withdraw its nomination would be regular and on a daily basis like a drumbeat. But I think that Biden's largely getting a free pass, and you can chalk that up to media bias, and that's surely a part of why that's happening. But I say that Democrats have been taking the black vote for granted every single election going back decades. It's as clear as day, and certainly reflected in Biden's analysis that African Americans don't have different attitudes about different things, and in the sense of entitlement that Democrats are basically deserve the black vote or else they ain't black. That's Biden's quote there. And maybe this goes back to Biden being a protege of Robert Byrd, former Senate Majority Leader, the late Robert Byrd. And this is from The Atlantic in 1975. When Joseph R. Biden Jr. was elected to the Senate from Delaware in 1972, at 30 became the youngest member of that august body. He had a great deal of help from some prominent and well-established fellow Democrats. Statewide mailings went out from Washington carrying Ted Kennedy's picture, Birch Bayh, and others. But some politicians also spoke in Delaware on his behalf, and there was an appearance in the conservative area below the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal by one Robert C. Byrd. When Biden came to Washington to interview people for his staff, he had the use of the whip's ornate, chandeliered office in the Capitol, along with Walter Huddleston of Kentucky and a few other members of that year's freshman class. He was looked after by Byrd and treated to occasional homemade political science lectures relating, among other things, that the Senate is made up of workhorses and show horses. Now, here's the problem. Robert Byrd was a member of a chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. The fact that he ever became the Senate Majority Leader is outrageous in and of itself, but clearly I think that this longstanding segregation relationship within the Democratic Party, it's a part of their history. They were the party of slavery, they were the party of segregation, and then some of these old school Democrats, Southern Democrats, were still in party leadership even as late as the 1970s, where Biden's voting for Robert Byrd for majority leader in 1977, 1979, and then minority leader in 81, 83, 85, and then majority leader again in 1987. And so really, I think that, this could really speak to why he's taken the positions he's taken over the years and maybe his attitude towards the African American community. In 1974, when a issue of federal funds for busing came up in the Senate, it was Biden who was co-sponsoring an amendment by Robert Byrd, a former Klansman, this is from Political Magazine, who had held the floor for more than 14 hours in a filibuster against the 1964 Civil Rights Bill that prohibited the use of federal funds to transport students beyond the school closest to their homes. And that passed into law in 1976. And then in 1977, Biden co-sponsored a measure that further restricted the federal government from desegregating city and suburban schools. Now, federal courts have changed what the position is on busing and school desegregation over the years, and they've moved more towards a standard where if schools are already integrated, then courts are not really going to step in any longer. But this, before those rulings ever came along, Biden was having the Senate step in and voting for Robert Byrd's amendment to block federal funds for any busing, and that was before the courts had really fully taken a position on that. And so that type of history, I think that's going to really prove to be a big advantage for President Trump this year. In 2016, Trump only got about 8% of the black vote in the 2016 exit poll, according to CNN. And I think that maybe with these statements and his long history with Biden there, I think that maybe he can actually get that number up. According to a YouGov poll, in June, President Trump's approval rating climbed with Black and Hispanic voters after the George Floyd riots prompted him to take a tougher stance on crime. And so here President Trump has been saying, let's get law and order, let's restore order to our cities. And Trump's numbers amongst both Hispanics and Blacks went up from 39% to 42% amongst Hispanics, and from 12% approval to 18% post-riots. And that's pretty telling. But also, a new poll is showing that Trump is closing the gap with Biden, and he's doing so by improving his standing amongst independents, men, Black, and Hispanic voters in West Coast. And amongst Black voters, Trump's gone up from 10% in late July to 12% in August 5th. So if he's getting 12% in 2020 of the Black vote, but he only got 8% in 2016, that's a significant improvement and probably portends pretty well for President Trump's election. And again, he wants to make an issue out of what Biden's saying and these many gaffes that he's making, and these very derogatory statements towards Black voters. After yesterday's statement, Sleepy Joe Biden is no longer worthy of the Black vote. And so I think when you couple it with President Trump's own positioning on many issues, for example, President Trump signed the Criminal Justice Reform, the First Step Act, into law. And that was with the support of many African-American leaders throughout the country, and something Obama had tried to do, but just was never able to get done. But Trump got it through Congress and actually got it signed into law, the First Step Act. And then there's also his push on opportunity zones to revitalize urban settings where many Black Americans live, to get more jobs and investment and capital, and that would create more jobs. And surely it did when Black unemployment was reaching record lows, the lowest ever under President Trump, when it was getting down to 5.4%. And that was in August of 2019. And then, unfortunately, like all other categories of unemployment, it went up during the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think President Trump is probably pretty well positioned to get those numbers back to where they were in 2019 with opportunity zones, with his tax reforms, deregulation, as well as his America First trade policies that are bringing jobs and manufacturing back to the United States. President Trump is clearly making a push, I think, for Americans of every race to vote for him based upon his economic policies and putting America first. And I'll leave you with the close here. In 2016, Trump's message to African Americans was, what do you have to lose in supporting his candidacy? Now the question is what they have to lose in opposing it. And in 2020, the answer may be a lot. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.